This hearing of the Subcommittee on Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research to review the USDA marketing programs will come to order. Chair would like to recognize our guest, Dr. Morris. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Ranking Member Del Bene. I'll offer my opening statement now. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the subcommittee hearing. And for the past several months, the committee has evaluated aspects of agricultural marketing. As we have observed, consumers, ourselves included, are becoming increasingly savvy. As the number of choices available to us have increased, so has our desire to locate and purchase products that appeal to a broader set of criteria. Consumers are seeking more and different food products, not only appealing to price and quality characteristics, but now also relating to various production methods such as grass-fed, natural, organic, or the use of technologies such as genetic engineering. While many farmers and ranchers are in the commodity business, some have been able to achieve market premiums by appealing to this new consumer demand and creating niche market opportunities for their products. By utilizing a variety of production practices, producers are distinguishing their products in order to appeal to unique consumer desires. Today, we will be hearing from the USDA regarding programs that allow the Agricultural Marketing Service to help producers and processors address consumer demand through development of voluntary and unique marketing claims. To distinguish and promote their products in the marketplace, USDA can assist producers using a variety of authorities, including the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1946 and the Organic Foods Production Act. As this committee has repeatedly observed, the keys to success in any marketing venture are voluntary participation, robust, transparent, and meaningful standards, and comprehensive enforcement to ensure compliance. Most people are aware of the USDA organic label, but may not be aware of the policies and procedures of the National Organic Program. Likewise, I'm sure many people have heard of and thoroughly enjoy certified Angus beef, but may not know where to find the standards that are in place for this program, nor may they be aware of the procedures in place to assure that this label claim is truthful and not misleading. USDA's Ag Marketing Service has long been in the business of assisting producers in developing the programs and tools to take advantage of market opportunities. As the Ag Committee considers proposals to develop other production-based marketing claims, we felt it useful to review USDA's authorities and procedures. And it's my hope that this information collected today will be of tremendous value as we look for opportunities to improve agricultural productivity, profitability, and sustainability. Before I turn to the ranking member, I want to briefly discuss a recent Supreme Court decision on a marketing order within this subcommittee's jurisdiction. In the ruling on Horn v. U.S. Department of Agriculture case, the Supreme Court held certain aspects of the raisin marketing order to be an unconstitutional taking. As with all marketing orders, these programs are initiated by each industry, and they have the opportunity to withdraw a marketing order at any time. Our responsibility is to uphold the integrity of marketing programs, as they are a proven useful tool for many industries, while ensuring our growers are not adversely harmed in the process. We are beginning to have bipartisan discussions with the USDA to determine the impact of this decision and may conduct additional hearings as the situation warrants. I now yield to my distinguished ranking member, Ms. Del Bene, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Davis, and thank you, Dr. Morris, for being with us here today. In recent years, the way the average consumer thinks about food has undergone a remarkable cultural transformation. Within a relatively short period of time, we've witnessed consumers rapidly moving from having little interest in a diverse variety of products and where their food comes from. Today's consumers seeing food as an exciting possibility, and with cooking now part of personal discovery. Most importantly, both for the consumer and for agriculture, food is no longer something that just appears on grocery shelves. It's inspected, scrutinized, and given careful thought. Consumers are the real drivers behind today's individualistic food environment, and it's within this newly developed foodie culture that the U.S. production agriculture now finds itself. Like most market evolutions, there's both good news and not so good news. The good news is food entrepreneurs, both producers and processors, have an increasingly diverse consumer base for which to tailor their products. The not-so-good news is an ever-growing and potentially confusing array of production, processing, and questions. And while more information for the consumer is a good thing, we need to ensure that this information is displayed in an easy-to-understand and accurate way. And we also need to ensure that the information provided is grounded in sound science. I'm pleased that the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service is here today because of their expertise in overseeing these emerging labels. We need to know how to best deliver information to the consumer, what's working now, what isn't, and how we continually improve the current system. As the committee exercises its responsibility in the area of marketing and labeling claims across the board, but including labels related to genetically engineered crops, it's critical that we all have a full understanding of the expertise that exists within AMS should Congress choose to move forward with any sort of new label. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from our witness today on this important matter, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so the witness may begin his testimony, and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. The chair would like to remind members that they will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were present at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of their arrival. I appreciate the members' understanding. Witnesses are reminded to limit their oral presentations to 5 minutes. All written statements will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome once again our witness, Dr. Craig Morris, Deputy Administrator, Livestock, Poultry, and Seed Program, the Agricultural Marketing Service of the USDA, based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Morris, please begin when you're ready.
Chairman Davis. Or AMS, whose mission is to facilitate the efficient, fair marketing of U.S. agricultural products. Within AMS, the Quality Systems Verification Programs, or QSVPs, offer to the agricultural industry a family of user fee-funded, audit-based, third-party verification services. There are a number of QSVPs, including those known as Export Verification Programs, or EV programs, which are negotiated between the United States and foreign governments to ensure U.S. products meet the requirements of foreign buyers and keep U.S. products competitive in an international marketplace. These EV programs serve vital to reopening foreign markets to U.S. beef after our nation's first case of bovine spongiform encephalopathy. However, the QSVP I wish to focus on today is the highly visible USDA Process Verified Program, or PVP. Currently, my program audits 51 different PVP companies with approximately 190 different process-verified marketing claims. Several PVP companies have labels in the marketplace featuring various market claims associated with the PVP shield. Examples of these marketing claims include use of antibiotics in animal agriculture, product availability, product palatability attributes such as tenderness, and employee training in areas of animal welfare. Transparency of the standard behind the marketing claim and the knowledge that USDA is the independent auditor are the two key aspects of the PVP. Companies establish their criteria they want verified, write a quality management system program manual, then undergo rigorous audits by AMS to ensure they are adhering to the standards they set for themselves. Recently, AMS approved a PVP for a company to verify their marketing claim that the food-grade corn and soybeans processed at one of their facilities are tested to ensure they are at least 99.1% free of traits that would indicate genetic engineering, and to market their products as non-GMO/GE. I also think it is important to point out what the PVP program does not do. The PVP program is a process verification program and not a product verification program. In the example of the non-GMO/GE PVP mentioned above, this means that there is no USDA non-GMO/GE marketing claim standard. In other words, USDA has not established a standard for what merits a non-GMO/GE marketing claim. Instead, the PVP verifies that the standard a company established for itself is transparent and being adhered to. By transparent, I mean that the standard behind the marketing claim is detailed on the USDA website, such as the specific GE traits being tested for, what testing methods are being used, the competency of those performing the tests, and that the USDA PVP website is available to any interested party to learn more about the basis of any PVP marketing claim. Secondly, the PVP is not a truth in food labeling program. Within the U.S. government, with narrow statutory exceptions, regulatory bodies at the Food and Drug Administration and other agencies such as the Food Safety and Inspection Service for certain commodities, and not AMS, are charged with ensuring that all food labeling claims, regardless of if they are associated with a PVP or not, are truthful and not misleading. We have seen and heard that there is some confusion regarding how this non-GMO/GE PVP relates to AMS's administration of the National Organic Program, or NOP. Therefore, I would like to offer some background differentiating those two programs. The NOP is a regulatory program within AMS that establishes national organic standards and protects the integrity of the USDA organic label through certification and proper enforcement. As authorized by Congress under the Organic Foods Production Act, these organic standards assure consumers that products with the USDA seal meet consistent, uniform standards. By contrast, USDA has not established standards for non-GMO/GE claims. So, although the non-GMO GE PVP outlined earlier does provide transparency and third-party verification, it is not establishing a national standard for what merits a non-GMO/GE claim like we have done for the National Organic Program for organic claims. In conclusion, AMS's audit-based services, such as the USDA PVP, allow producers to assure customers of their ability to provide consistent quality products or services, but do not establish national standards for marketing claims. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Since it is a fly-out day, I'm going to reserve my questions for the end. So I'd like to begin by recognizing the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Morris, you hit a little bit on the process versus product issue. Could you expand on that briefly for us?
Absolutely. What the USDA Process Verification Program is about is that when a company establishes for itself a standard that it wants to adhere to, we ensure that essentially the internal quality management system within that company is operating as intended. It takes on 2 steps. One, we require a company to develop a documented quality management system. They submit that to us. We do a desk review of that to make sure that as written, that would deliver on the claim that they've set for themselves. They will consistently produce a product that meets their standard. We then do on-site audits to make sure that in plant, the things that they're doing reflect what we saw in the written manual. So it's all about them adhering to their own systems, but it's nothing about at the end of the day, the product meets a certain USDA standard.
So when the USDA set the standards for organics, for example, you are double checking, if you will, them to make sure that they are complying with what they said their process was. Am I understanding that correctly?
Somewhat, yes. In the case of the National Organic Program, Congress provided us express authority to develop national standards for what merits an organic claim. So we actually have a standard for what meets an organic claim. Then we have specific enforcement powers and investigation powers provided to us again by Congress and implemented through regulation. And we go out and accredit the certifiers to ensure that they're competent as a certification body in performing the certifications on farm of organic agriculture.
All right. Could you speak to the impact of the mandatory labeling in general as compared to the voluntary labeling and the differences in the supply chain and the cost to the consumer of the products?
The U.S. marketing chain is very dynamic, and there's really not a one-size-fits-all approach. Clearly, in the case of the organic program, Congress provided USDA with specific authority to set a single national standard. In many cases, the marketplace works quite well through a process verification where the industry sets for itself standards that it basically adheres to. So there's not necessarily one specific approach that works best in any one situation. We do, obviously, though, look to Congress for input in terms of the specific areas that would merit standardization nationally.
But if there were no uniform standard, you could have, I'm from Georgia, so you could have one standard for Atlanta, you could have one standard for Augusta, one for Tifton, one for Columbus, one for Macon, and that would create disruptions in the supply chain, I would assume, and then maybe the consumer didn't actually know what they were getting.
Well, and it gets to exactly the reason the PVP was developed. The purpose of the PVP, what it was designed to do is when you see similar claims in commerce, to be able to have transparency back to what is the standard behind that claim. So what the PVP is trying to do is give consumers that variability to go back and see those different standards that are in place in the marketplace. But we have many standards oftentimes, and they operate quite well.
And without those standards, I would suggest it would be inconsistent and confusing.
And there can be, yes.
I'm sorry?
And there can be, yes, if there's not transparency back to those standards themselves.
I'm gonna yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman, but I may come back and ask another question as time goes on.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Del Bene for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Dr. Morris, for being here. One of my main concerns when we're talking about any potential GMO or non-GMO certification program is that it not conflict in any way with the organic regulations or process that's already in place. Many in the industry, though certainly not uniformly, view organic certifications as the gold standard. And so I was wondering, in your opinion, would the current organic certification be sufficient to be labeled as non-GMO?
Well, yes, or organic, anything that is USDA organic is by definition non-GMO, as genetically engineered crops are not allowed to be used in that system. Now, I have to recognize that I do not oversee the National Organic Program. I have a peer deputy administrator, Miles McAvoy, and if you would like, we can provide you with additional information in written form after I've had an opportunity to confer with him that goes into much more detail about how the National Organic Program not only controls that issue, but allows for the marketing of those products as non-GMO or non-GE.
Okay, no, I'd appreciate that. That would be helpful. And in today's fiscal environment where resources are definitely scarce all around, I worry that with a new certification process, resources could be diverted away from other important programs, not only organic programs, but programs across the board. And so can you comment on how this might be avoided, or are more resources needed if we were going to have other programs that were going to be available?
The PVP that we operate today is fully user fee funded. So we establish a fee rate that is cost recovery. It basically pays for the caliber of employees that we have carrying out the activities. So there are no appropriations required for carrying out the PVP.
And any other particular programs that might be put together would probably be user funded as well then?
Yes, the only issues that we would potentially have would be the development of standards or things like that the subcommittee could be contemplating that we would need some source of funds to recover.
You also talked earlier about the need for a quality management system, and so I wondered if you could describe what that is, and are they used in areas other than agriculture?
Yes, quality management systems are used extensively. They're used extensively in the manufacturing and service industries. Essentially, a quality management system is a collection of the business processes that are focused on meeting a customer's requirements. It's expressed as the organizational structure, the policies, the procedures, the processes, and resources needed to implement quality management. There are a number of different quality management system regimes out there. By far and away, the ISO 9000 family of standards is the most widely implemented worldwide, and that's the standards that we've chosen to implement as the basis of our process verified program.
And you brought up the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and why do you use their guidelines? And so how did you go about using their guidelines, and how did they establish them?
Without question, the ISO is the world's largest developer of voluntary international standards. They facilitate worldwide trade by providing that common set of language between nations. They have nearly 20,000 different standards through the ISO that cover everything from manufactured products and technology to food safety to agriculture, healthcare. It basically allows products from different markets to be directly compared. When we established the Process Verified program, we wanted it to have international recognition. We knew that our audit-based services under the broader class of what we call those quality system verification programs would need to have foreign recognitions from foreign governments so that we could keep U.S. agricultural products flowing. That's why we chose to use that as the basis of our program.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. That completes my question. I'll yield back.
Wow. It's an efficient hearing. We actually have members yielding back time. Mr. Morelle is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and my apologies for being late. I missed some of your testimony, but I just, in general, there's been a lot of discussion, and when people meet with me, there's this question of voluntary versus mandatory, and you may have addressed that already in some of your comments, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's very similar to the issue of whether or not there needs to be a single national standard for every single marketing claim out there. I think voluntary versus mandatory works well in different situations. We have in AMS a number of mandatory programs and a number of voluntary programs, both of which we believe are doing an outstanding job of facilitating marketing. It really, I think, depends on the context of the specific issue in play.
And just, could you speak a little bit about some of your voluntary marketing programs, and again, maybe some of those you've already, but how, how effective they are?
You bet. It would be, you would be hard pressed to go through a grocery store and not see the product of a lot of our voluntary marketing programs. Everything from USDA choice beef to grade A eggs to certified Angus beef to a lot of the claims that you'd see on particular products related to responsible use of antibiotics or humanely raised claims. All of those are voluntary activities. So these are companies that have decided to voluntarily differentiate themselves in the marketplace and utilize AMS as their third-party auditor, and then also have the transparency behind the standards that they've set for themselves, not only available on the USDA website, but available to anybody that would seek that information.
And how, in terms of compliance with the standard, how does that work?
Well, it depends on the program. For a number of our mandatory programs, we have express authority provided to us for investigation and enforcement. In the case of our voluntary programs, companies, especially PVP companies, they have basically chosen to differentiate themselves from the broader market. They have chosen to hold themselves up as a company that not only has transparency, but is following through on their standards. In that situation, if a company has built a brand around a PVP and then loses that PVP, that penalty alone is quite significant to that company in the marketplace. Clearly, in the course of our audits, both desk and on-site, we do find nonconformances. We've had firms that have lost their process verified status. That impacts their ability to continue to sell products as process verified and really undermines the brand that they've developed for themselves.
So you, after conducting an audit, if you find irregularities, or do you notify them and then give them an opportunity to comply, or is it immediate loss of status?
It depends on the severity of the nonconformance. We have minor nonconformances that we can deal with in follow-up audits. We're requesting corrective and preventative action. We have significant nonconformances that can render a program immediately unapproved, and we're actually at that point looking back into the product that's been produced since our last audit. So it varies based on the issues at play. We have for-cause audits that will see things occur in the marketplace or have third parties bring to us product that they don't believe to be conforming, and that can initiate us coming in and doing an on-site for-cause audit, which then, again, can affect their approval.
Well, thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Morse, for being here. Appreciate all the work that you do, this is an interesting hearing, and I'm trying to think of this in terms of context, in the context of something that we're beginning to talk about in this committee and, in other committees about the issue of GMO labeling and voluntary versus mandatory or only voluntary non-GMO labeling, and quite frankly, I'm kind of puzzled of this debate because I kind of fall on the side of the fact that if a majority of people in this country want there to be GMO labeling so they know what they're buying. Again, I'm not making any judgment about the safety or the quality of food. We've all been eating GMOs for a long time, but if a majority of people want that, why shouldn't we give it to them? I saw there's a poll that came out that someone had just provided me from the Mellman Group, found that Americans overwhelmingly favor requiring labels on GMO food. 71% of Americans strongly favor GMO labeling. And I guess the argument against the voluntary stuff is that some might do it, some might not, but it just makes it more difficult for the consumer. And I'm not asking you to take a position on some of the legislation coming through here, but you know, if you're going to come up with a standard for what's non-GMO, wouldn't it just be simpler for the consumer to have, you know, a one label that indicates whether something, you know, contains GMOs?
In AMS, we carry out both kinds of programs, mandatory labeling programs, and then also our voluntary labeling programs. Again, the voluntary labeling programs are carried out on a fee-for-service basis. So these are companies that are choosing to differentiate themselves in the market, hoping to command a premium for their products, because obviously they're paying for the verification service that we provide. So the question is one of, is it appropriate for companies to try to demand a premium for the product, which is what people obviously use AMS for with our Process Verified program and other voluntary marketing programs, or in the mandatory scheme that we carry out in other areas where we've been provided authority by Congress.
Right, and you know, and we've heard a lot of talk of that, well, we can't, the mandatory route, you know, costs all this money. It's going to cost the consumers all this money. And yet I'm reading one of these Washington Post stories from a fact checker that says the people who claim that this is going to cost consumers significantly more in groceries per family per year, one gets 3 Pinocchios for what it's worth. But do you guys have any evidence on, you know, the cost to consumers on mandatory versus voluntary labeling?
No, again, because the voluntary programs basically go where the market wants them. And so we don't typically sit down on our voluntary programs and determine the return on investment, because a company is making that decision when they approach us. And so as we dealt with on this particular firm that we were discussing during the testimony, they've made a business decision that the investment in AMS auditing is going to help them command a premium in the marketplace for their products. That's a very different model. So we don't track the environment in a mandatory versus a voluntary, unless we're going into an environment where we're given authority by Congress to require labeling.
So basically at this point, if Congress said to you, you know, we want mandatory GMO labeling, you would then
Conduct an economic analysis.
All right. Yeah, no, I thank you. I just raised the issue because, you know, I've been at a number of briefings where people have kind of talked about the pros and cons of, you know, GMO foods and how, how they fit into our, you know, our society right now. But it just seems to me that the more people resist giving the public what they want, the more the public begins to suspect that maybe there's something wrong. And I think sunshine and transparency is a good thing. And so I would hope that Congress would move along the line of, you know, greater transparency and giving the American people what they want. So I thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Massachusetts wish to submit his poll or his Pinocchios for the record?
Absolutely. Thank you. Unanimous consent and all the other blessings you can give me.
Without objection.
All right, thank you.
Well, Dr. Morris, again, I appreciate you being here. I'm going to go ahead and ask you a few questions myself. I mentioned this in my opening statement about the Supreme Court's decision in the case involving volume control components of the raisin marketing order, and the court held the requirement for producers to surrender a portion of their crop without just compensation to be an unconstitutional taking. Can you provide for the record an analysis of this decision, and in particular, what, if any, implications this decision has for this or other marketing orders?
Absolutely. As I opened with, my span of authority, the Agriculture Marketing Service is divided primarily along commodity lines, and I don't actually have marketing orders under my purview, but let me go back to the department and we'll work with our Office of General Counsel and the Department of Justice and prepare something for you in writing.
Thank you, thank you. And for the record, too,
Yes.
you already oversee a program that is synonymous with non-GMO. That's organic. So can you tell us for the record today that if one buys an organic product, certified organic product, meets all the standards, that it does not include genetically modified seeds?
Now, again, I have a peer deputy administrator, Miles McAvoy. He is the deputy administrator of the National Organic Program. Let me go back with him, and we'll prepare for you, for the record, a much more expansive reply.
All right, and the organic program sets a single standard for organic marketing claims, though. And can we fairly conclude the establishment of this voluntary and transparent standard for organic has helped actually build the market for those products?
Yes, I think that would be a fair conclusion.
Okay. All right. I'll reserve the balance of my time and recognize Mr. Scott again for a second round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the things I do think is important to point out is that the certified Angus, if you will, that's a voluntary. And when I sold Angus cows with my grandfather for a long time, we also had a commercial herd. When we sold our Angus cows, we didn't imply that the Limousine, Brahma, Angus mix cows were unsafe, if you will. And so some of the, if you will, things that are being said about the use of biotechnology in agriculture, I think is confusing and in the end misleading. We use less fertilizer, less pesticides. The biotechnology has been good for the environment, it's been good for the producer, and it's been good for the consumer. But one of the key differences in the certified Angus voluntary labeling and what we're facing right now is we're facing mandatory labeling from a government, in some cases states, in some cases they're trying to do it at the local level. And I guess my question for you is, if somebody passed a standard, let's say for whatever city we want to call, let's say they wanted to pass one for Washington, D.C., who would certify that?
Well, that would be up to the firm that would, well, I guess it would be up to the city or the municipality that's passed that requirement. So we have not been approached at AMS about carrying out any mandatory labeling programs for genetically engineered products.
So if a state, for example, we've seen states go down this path, who would certify that at the state level?
That would have to be determined at the state level.
And so the USDA would not participate?
There are a lot of different agencies that relate to food labeling. AMS deals, with the exception of those areas, we have mandatory labeling programs or specific statutory authority to set standards. Most of what we're dealing with, or most of what I particularly deal with, are these voluntary marketing claims that are used at a national level. We would probably need to go back and consider the impacts of some of these state level labeling laws and what impact that would have on USDA or more broadly the executive branch. I probably need to follow up with you on that because that gets outside of really my scope.
But somebody would have to pay for that labeling. Somebody would have to pay for that standard. I mean, the state or whoever passed that law would either have to contract with somebody to do that. And I guess that's where I think that we're headed down a very dangerous path here for the consumer, where if something is not done here, then you're going to see more inconsistency and more confusing scenarios for the consumer. I mean, the USDA is the standard for guaranteeing that we are getting what we purchase when we go to the store. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think there's a lot that needs to be done here to protect the consumer and to make sure that the consumer understands actually what they are getting and that there is a uniform standard. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan is recognized. Mr. Morelle for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you for your testimony, Dr. Morris. And I wonder if you could help me with some of the definitions that you hear a lot. There's genetically engineered, genetically modified. Are those synonymous terms?
Well, genetic engineering is really the method used to arrive at the claim. In the case of genetically modified, a genetically modified organism, GMO, those are terms that consumers, rightly or wrongly, are associating with a class of products that they're wanting to seek more information about or have an opinion about one way or another. So genetic engineering is clearly the technology that is arriving at this class of foods that are often labeled as non-GMO. There's a lot of federal guidance in this area, but there are different kinds of genetic, it is very complicated. So we can get back to you with a little bit more in writing if you want in terms of some of the different technologies and how they apply. but genetic engineering is clearly the proper term for this class of foods that we're discussing.
So it's the means of genetic modification is the genetic engineering.
Correct.
And some of the modifications occur in nature, do they not?
Absolutely.
Could you speak to that?
Yeah, in the case of the non-GMO/GEPVP that we approved, we're specifically looking for those traits that indicate genetic engineering. So an example in let's say, livestock, where you can naturally select cattle that are polled, without horns, or you could go in with gene editing and kind of preordain that you've decided that this is going to be a polled animal more efficiently than you would through natural selection. Those are very different things. And so in the case of our non-GMO GE program, we're really looking for those traits that wouldn't be arrived at through natural selection that are much more genetic engineering as opposed to some of the more gene editing and some of those other things.
And how do you handle that with respect to natural? Because if certain things are being genetically modified naturally, how do you approach that?
And AMS doesn't regulate the term natural. For meat, poultry, and egg products, a sister agency, the Food Safety Inspection Service, and for all other commodities, the Food and Drug Administration. So natural claims fall in a whole different area that are somewhat independent or in a separate stream from the debate we're having around non-GMO GE.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse, is recognized for, I haven't figured out how long yet because he's late, for 5 minutes.
So I'll make up some time a little bit there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and apologize for my lateness, but I can assure you I was doing good work. But, appreciate your being here, Dr. Morris. I don't really have a question as such, so I won't take much time, but I just wanted to expound on what I understand my colleague from the state of Washington and our ranking member, Ms. Delbene, was asking if I could. Under current USDA regulation, it is in fact the case that biotech products are not allowed to be certified organic. I'd like to read an excerpt from the USDA blog from a post titled Organic 101. Can GMOs be used in organic products? And that was dated May 17th, 2013. If I may, just to enter into the record, the use of genetic engineering or genetically modified organisms is prohibited in organic products. This means an organic farmer cannot plant GMO seeds, an organic cow cannot eat GMO alfalfa or corn, and an organic soup producer cannot use any GMO ingredients. And the reason, Mr. Chairman, that I raise this point is because it's frustrating to me that USDA already has this, what I would call a great voluntary tool for consumers to know what's in the food products that they purchase, but that some jurisdictions feel compelled to impose duplicative, costly, and mandatory burdens on consumers and producers that, as far as can be seen from the USDA's own blog, add no additional benefit. And so ultimately, I believe this Congress and this committee will likely have to consider legislation to ensure that our farmers, ranchers, growers, producers, and families aren't harmed by these costly, unworkable rules. And that's not necessarily a question, but just a statement. I wanted to make sure that I got that in the record. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Let the record show the gentleman yielded back 3 minutes of time. Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. And I want to go ahead and get into a few more questions with you, Dr. Morris, and we're waiting on possibly another member to get here to ask a few questions. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about HR 1599, and I would like to know, has the USDA taken a look at the USDA-related portions of HR 1599, the Pompeo-Butterfield bill?
Yes, we have looked at the legislation. We've worked with technical assistance with the subcommittee. Absolutely.
All right. If the non-GE certification provisions included in the Pompeo-Butterfield bill were enacted, would that give the USDA the authority to establish a standard for non-GE food labeling programs?
We're familiar, as I stated, we're familiar with the legislation as introduced. Our read is that the bill is aimed at providing authority to establish a standard, but certainly there are many aspects of the legislation, and we continue to analyze its impact if enacted in its current form. It does affect many agencies in the department, so we're working through that.
All right. Under the bill, the USDA is instructed to promulgate regulations establishing a non-GE labeling program. When the agency promulgates regulations to implement such programs, as they did with the National Organic Program, what kind of opportunity is typically available for the public to comment and influence the rulemaking process?
Again, without the final legislation explicitly directing us on what to do, there are several processes that we could use. With our standard rulemaking process, we always do provide the public with multiple opportunities to comment. Again, we don't have the final legislation or our regulatory guidance at this time.
And we don't have the final legislation either. Otherwise, hopefully you can come back and we can have further discussion. But my last question, some observers assert that because some consumers desire information concerning the use or non-use of genetic engineering, all consumers should pay the price through mandatory labeling schemes. I know that some other members mentioned this process with you, but it seems to me that USDA's voluntary labeling programs provide additional information to consumers about how their food was raised or produced, and they do so in a manner that adds value to the agricultural production marketing claim. Would you agree that the USDA's labeling programs provide value?
In short, yes. As we stated, these services are provided for a fee, so the private sector is very smart. They're making a decision that there is a value in paying for the service that we provide.
So you agree these labels provide useful information to consumers who actually desire it?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have no further questions, Mr. Thomas. I will yield to the ranking member for any last questions or closing statement.
I have no further questions. I just want to thank you again for being here and appreciate your follow-up on the
You bet.
earlier information from your colleague. Thank you.
Today, the subcommittee examined the tools and capabilities of USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service to assist food producers to market their products. As we look more closely at the types of products consumers are demanding, we need to have the programs in place to ensure that the claims made on product labels are truthful and not misleading. Farmers want and need to provide consumers with the products they desire, and as we've just heard, the Agricultural Marketing Service has the tools and expertise to provide consumers with the information they want in a manner that supports interstate commerce. We will soon consider a substitute amendment to H.R. 1599, the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act, which seeks to put in place the policy to make this work. That substitute is circulating in draft form and will continue to go through refinement as we near committee consideration. Consumers are now being exposed to arbitrary and inconsistent label claims, some for non-GE products such as salt, where there is obviously no genetically engineered salt. Consumers will benefit from legislation under consideration which would establish a national, uniform, and voluntary marketing approach to these label claims. The House Committee on Agriculture has a long history of involvement in developing policies to further the advancement of agricultural biotechnology. We are aware of the incredible potential this technology brings to food and fiber production. With biotechnology, the careful and precise addition of one or a few genes to a plant may make it more productive and nutritious, more tolerant to environmental stresses such as drought, and more resistant to disease and pests. These technologies can likewise improve the efficiency and therefore the productivity of agriculture, while at the same time reducing detrimental effects on the environment. These and other advances have enabled us to enjoy the safest, highest quality, most abundant, and affordable supply of food and fiber in mankind's history. As our knowledge has increased, so is the speed and precision in which we are able to harness natural capabilities to improve the plants that we cultivate. We just heard from the USDA that they have the capability and resources to provide the valuable oversight of these voluntary marketing claims. We know from previous hearings in this committee, as well as the Energy and Commerce Committee, that we have a robust regulatory review process to ensure human, plant, and animal health, as well as environmental health. We look forward to everyone's thoughtful review and constructive suggestions. And with that, I want to thank the witness for his time here today. I look forward to having you back in front of this subcommittee to discuss this legislation further. And with that, I will read the obligatory under the rules of the committee. The record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This subcommittee on biotechnology, horticulture, and research hearing is now adjourned.